The rain hammered against the glass roof of the greenhouse, a relentless rhythm that usually brought peace to Elias, but tonight it sounded like a warning. He stood alone among the silent company of 3,000 orchids. Elias was a man who understood roots better than he understood people, a botanist who had spent 40 years coaxing beauty out of patience and moss. He adjusted the thermostat on the wall, his knuckles swollen with arthritis, wincing as the dial refused to turn smoothly. He was 72 years old, and like the wooden beams holding up the glass above him, he was beginning to feel the weight of the storms he had weathered alone. He turned his gaze toward the far corner of the greenhouse, where his life's work sat upon a pedestal of reclaimed teak, bathed in the soft glow of a grow light. It was a rare species of orchid, Dendrophylax londinii, the ghost orchid, notoriously difficult to cultivate outside of a wild swamp. He had spent 2 decades trying to make it bloom. It was a tangle of gray-green roots wrapped around a piece of apple wood, leafless and seemingly lifeless to the untrained eye. But Elias knew it was alive. He checked it obsessively, convinced it would eventually reward him. But perfection is a heavy burden to carry. And tonight, the burden felt heavier because he wasn't the only one in the greenhouse. Standing near the entrance, shaking the water from a yellow umbrella, was Sarah, a woman of 40 with eyes that mirrored Elias's own deep brooding brown. She was his daughter, but the distance between them was measured in more than just the miles she had driven from the city to be here. She looked at the humid jungle Elias had built with a mixture of nostalgia and frustration, her gaze landing on a pile of unpaid heating bills sitting on his potting bench. Sarah was a project manager for a large tech firm. She lived in a world of timelines, deliverables, and concrete answers, a stark contrast to Elias's world of slow growth and silent waiting. She had come with a proposition, one she had hinted at over the phone, but standing here in the damp warmth of his sanctuary, the words seemed to stick in her throat, caught between respect for his passion and the reality of his declining health. "Dad, it's freezing out there," Sarah finally said, her voice cutting through the hum of the ventilation fans, bringing a reality into the room that Elias had been trying to ignore. He didn't turn to face her immediately, pretending to inspect the underside of a cattleya leaf for pests, a defense mechanism he had perfected over the years. "The heater is struggling, Elias," she continued, using his first name as she often did when she was trying to be serious, trying to bridge the gap of authority. "I looked at the oil tank gauge on my way in. You're running on fumes, and the forecast says the temperature is going to drop another 10 degrees tonight." She took a step closer, her boots crunching on the gravel floor. She waited to see if he would finally hear what she wasn't saying. Elias finally turned, wiping his hands on his canvas apron, his expression guarded but tired. "The delivery is coming Tuesday," he lied smoothly, though they both knew he hadn't called the company because he couldn't afford the fill-up this month. "The plants are fine, Sarah. They are resilient, more resilient than people give them credit for." He walked past her toward the potting bench, trying to hide the slight limp in his left leg. He picked up a Mr. bottle, pumping it rhythmically, creating a fine cloud of water over a row of seedlings. "You didn't drive 2 hours in a storm just to check my oil gauge," he said, the softness of his voice betraying the hardness of his words. He knew why she was here. She wanted him to sell. She wanted him to let go of the greenhouse, the land, and the ghost orchid, to move into a condo where the heat was electric and the only plants were plastic silk arrangements in the lobby. Sarah sighed, placing her hand on a sturdy wooden table, feeling the dampness of the wood, remembering how she used to do her homework here while he repotted seedlings. "I have a buyer, Dad," she said quietly, the words hanging in the humid air like a heavy mist. "A commercial nursery. They want the stock. They'll take good care of the collection. And the land developer is willing to pay above market value for the lot." She watched his back stiffen, the rhythmic pumping of the mister stopping abruptly. "You can't keep doing this alone. Look at your hands. Look at the roof leaks. It's time to rest." She wasn't trying to be cruel. She was trying to save him from a collapse she could see coming, a collapse as inevitable as gravity. But to Elias, she wasn't offering a rescue. She was asking him to abandon his children. "You talk about them like they are inventory," Elias said, his voice low and trembling with a quiet intensity that made Sarah step back. He turned to the ghost orchid, pointing a shaking finger at the tangle of roots. "Do you know how orchid seeds germinate, Sarah?" He didn't wait for an answer. He retreated into the safety of facts, into the science that had always made more sense to him than emotions. "In the wild, an orchid seed is dust. It has no energy reserve, no food. It cannot grow on its own." He looked at her, his eyes pleading for her to understand the depth of the dependency. "It needs a specific fungus, a mycorrhizal fungus, to infect it. The fungus digests nutrients and feeds the seed. Without that connection, the seed dies. It's a partnership, a symbiosis. You can't just move them to a warehouse and expect them to survive. They know this place. They know me. He stopped speaking, his hands still trembling in the air between them. Sarah listened, her heart aching because she heard the fear beneath the lecture, the terror of a man who defined his existence by his utility to these silent living things. I know, Dad, she said softly, walking over to stand beside him, looking at the ghost orchid which looked, to her, like a dead stick. I remember you teaching me that when I was 10, but symbiosis goes both ways. If the host dies, the partner suffers too. She reached out, hesitating, then rested her hand on his arm. You are the host here, and you are running out of energy. If you crash, all of this crashes with you. I'm trying to be that partner for you, Dad. I'm trying to give you the support you need to keep going, but you have to let me in. You cannot survive this winter alone. It was the most honest thing she had said to him in years, a direct challenge to his pride, formulated in the language he understood best. Elias pulled his arm away gently, unable to meet her gaze, the vulnerability too much for him to process in the moment. I need to check the vents, he mumbled, moving away from her warmth, retreating into the mechanical duties of the greenhouse. Accepting help still felt like admitting defeat. He cranked the wheel of the ventilation system, the metal groaning in protest. He wanted to be the strong oak that sheltered others, not the delicate seed that needed feeding. But as he turned the wheel, a sharp pain shot through his shoulder, forcing him to gasp and lean heavily against the cold glass. The wind outside picked up, rattling the panes in their frames, and the lights in the greenhouse flickered once, twice, and then died. Darkness swallowed them, save for the gray ambient light filtering in from the storm clouds and the headlights of Sarah's car in the driveway. The silence that followed was sudden and terrifying. The hum of the heater stopped. The fan spun down to a halt. In the sudden quiet, Elias's gasp for breath was loud and jagged. He fumbled in the dark, panic rising in his chest, not for himself, but for the ghost orchid. Without the heat, if the temperature dropped too fast, the shock would kill the delicate buds he had been nurturing for months. He felt a hand grab his good shoulder, steady and firm. I've got a flashlight in the car. Sarah's voice came out of the dark, calm and pragmatic. Don't move. I'll be right back. Elias stood in the dark, shivering as the temperature began its slow, inevitable descent, the cold seeping through the glass like an intruder. For the first time, he admitted he could not fight the elements alone. He heard the car door slam, and a beam of light cut through the gloom, dancing across the leaves of the orchids, making them look like creatures in a deep sea. Sarah returned, not just with a flashlight, but with a portable battery pack she kept in her trunk for work site. We can plug the heater into this, she said, kneeling by the unit. It won't run the whole system, but it will run the fan and the ignition for a few hours. Enough to get us through the worst of the front. She didn't ask for permission, she just worked, her hands moving with a dexterity that Elias recognized. He watched her connect the wires, the beam of the flashlight held in her teeth, her focus absolute. He saw his own hands in hers, the same shape, the same capability. He realized then that he had been so busy trying to protect the greenhouse from her that he hadn't noticed she was the only one capable of understanding it. She wasn't an invader, she was a cutting from the original stock. A thought struck him, a memory of a botanical fact he had long neglected. Asterisk vegetative propagation. Asterisk when a mother plant is stressed or dying, it often puts all its remaining energy into producing a keiki, a Hawaiian word for baby, a clone that grows off the stem. The mother plant withers, so the keiki can live. It wasn't a tragedy, it was a strategy. It was a legacy. He lowered himself slowly to the bench, watching her work, the resistance draining out of him. It's on, Sarah said, the heater sputtering back to life, blowing a stream of warm air that felt like a miracle in the cooling room. She sat back on her heels, brushing hair out of her face, looking up at him with a mixture of triumph and concern. It will hold until morning, Dad. But we need a plan for tomorrow. We can't keep patching this. She stood up and walked over to him, shining the light on the floor so he wouldn't trip. Come on, let's go to the house. You're freezing. This time, when she offered her arm, Elias didn't pull away. He leaned on her, his weight heavy, but she bore it without flinching. As they walked toward the door, he looked back one last time at the ghost orchid in the corner, shrouded in shadow, surviving on the warmth his daughter had just provided. They sat in his kitchen, the storm raging outside, mugs of hot tea steaming between them on the scarred wooden table. The house was cold, but the kitchen was warm from the stove. Elias stared into his mug, the steam rising like the mist in his greenhouse. I used to think, he began, his voice raspy, that if I let anyone else touch them, they would ruin them, that nobody could have the patience. He looked up at Sarah, really looking at her, seeing the lines of fatigue around her eyes that mirrored his own. But you fixed the heater in 5 minutes. I would have spent an hour looking for the manual. He offered a small, self-deprecating smile. I've been a stubborn old fool, Sarah. I've been trying to stop time. Sarah wrapped her hands around her mug, her eyes softening. You haven't been trying to stop time, Dad. You've been trying to preserve Mom. This place, it's all her. She loved the orchids. She reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. But she wouldn't want you to freeze to death trying to keep a flower alive. She would want you to live. The truth of it hit Elias hard. He had buried his grief in the soil, watered it, and expected it to bloom into something that would fill the void. But the void remained, and the work had only grown harder. He nodded slowly, a tear tracing a path through the deep lines of his cheek. The buyer, he whispered. The nursery. Do they know about the ghost orchid? They do, Sarah said gently. They want to make it the centerpiece of their conservatory. They have a team, Dad. Climate control. Specialized staff. It would be safe there. Safer than here. She squeezed his hand. And I told them the deal only works if you come on as a consultant. You don't have to haul bags of fertilizer anymore. You just have to tell them what the plants need. You teach them. You supervise. She watched his face closely, waiting for the refusal, waiting for the pride to rear up again. You could be the mentor, not the laborer. You could finally just enjoy them. Elias looked out the window where the rain was turning to snow, sticking to the glass. A consultant, a teacher. It was a role he hadn't considered. He thought of the mycorrhizal fungus again. It didn't just feed the seed. It created a network that connected the entire forest floor, sharing information, sharing resources. By hoarding his knowledge, by keeping the orchids isolated, he had limited their potential. If he let them go to the conservatory, millions of people would see them. The beauty he had cultivated in the dark would be brought into the light, and he would still be part of it, just in a different way. A way that didn't require him to break his back every winter. The ghost orchid, Elias said, his voice stronger now. It's close to blooming. The spike is set. If we move it now, the stress might cause it to blast, to drop the bud. He looked at Sarah, the expert debating the logistics, not the victim fleeing the disaster. We would need a heated transport, humidified, vibration dampening. He was negotiating, listing terms to keep from feeling like he was surrendering. But as the words left his mouth, the fight finally left his body. He was accepting. Sarah smiled, a genuine, relieved smile that lit up the dim kitchen. I have a friend with a climate-controlled van. We can arrange it. We can do it your way, Dad. Just let's do it. The next morning broke cold and brilliant, the sun reflecting off the fresh snow that blanketed the garden. The greenhouse stood silent and glittering, a crystal palace in the white landscape. Elias walked in, Sarah by his side. The heater was still humming, the battery pack drained but having done its job. The air was warm. They walked to the back corner. The ghost orchid was there, unaffected by the drama of the night. And there, at the end of the long, thin spike, the bud had begun to unfurl. Two long, white petals, trailing down like the tails of a ghost, pale and ethereal against the dark wood. Elias gasped softly. He had waited 20 years for this moment. It was magnificent. It was perfect. And he wasn't alone to see it. He looked at Sarah, who was staring at the flower with wonder. It's beautiful, she whispered. It looks like it's floating. Elias realized that if he had stubbornly refused her help yesterday, if he had let the heater die, this bloom would be black and withered this morning. His pride would have killed the very thing he loved. It needs a name, he said, his voice thick with emotion. When you register a new hybrid or a bloom, you give it a name. He reached out and touched a leaf of the plant, then looked at his daughter. I want to name it the Sarah, he said. Sarah looked at him, surprised, tears welling in her eyes. Dad, no. You should name it after Mom. Elias shook his head slowly. Mom has the cattleya. That was her flower. This one. He gestured to the resilient, strange, stubborn plant that had survived the dark and the cold to bloom when it was ready. This one is tough. This one needed a lot of time to find its way, but it's stronger than it looks. It's you. Sarah hugged him then, a fierce, tight embrace that bridged the years of silence and misunderstanding. In the warmth of the greenhouse, surrounded by the silent breathing of thousands of plants, Elias finally let go. He felt the immense weight of the property, the maintenance, the constant worry lift off his shoulders. He wasn't abandoning them. He was graduating them. He was securing their future. And in doing so, he had secured his own return to the world of the living. He held his daughter, feeling the beat of her heart, a rhythm of life far more important than any blooming schedule. 3 months later, when the snow had finally melted into the earth, the transition was complete. The greenhouse was empty, the glass panels stripped clean, the pots moved to the grand conservatory in the city. Elias stood in the center of the new exhibit, leaning on a cane, but standing tall. The Sarah ghost orchid was displayed in a glass case, humidity controlled to the decimal, with a crowd of people admiring it. He saw a young intern struggling with a mister bottle nearby, looking unsure. Elias hesitated for a moment, the old instinct to do it himself rising up. But then he caught Sarah's eye from across the room. She smiled and nodded. Elias walked over to the intern. Here, he said, his voice kind, his quiet voice carrying the weight of 40 years of wisdom. Let me show you a trick with the nozzle. It mimics the morning mist. He wasn't the owner anymore. He was the teacher. He stood back, content to watch it grow. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the need to correct anyone. He looked at the orchid, then at his daughter laughing with a colleague, and he knew that everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. A quiet voice, sharing a human story.